I'm going to start the broadcast now.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Eric Coleman with Romana Software, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar, Acceptance Criteria versus Scenarios, Writing Better User Stories with Romana ALM by Dr. Hanna. We're excited you're able to join us today and set aside an hour to attend this webinar. This webinar is sponsored by Romana Software, the leaders in application lifecycle management technology. For more information on how Romana ALM can help you or your organization, please visit romanasoftware.com. You may submit your questions at any time by using your question box in your GoToWebinar window. Today's presenter will answer as many questions within the time allowed at the end of today's session. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing within 48 hours at romanasoftware.com. At the end of today's webinar, you'll be asked to complete a short survey. At Romana Software, we strive to provide the highest quality educational resources for the public and would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to complete this short survey. I will now turn the webinar over to today's presenter, Dr. Hanna. Dr. Hanna?
Thank you, Eric. All right, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Even I can see some people from other countries, so good evening as well. Well, it has been a while, and for a long period of time now, it's been there has been some confusion between the concept of acceptance criteria in Agile and user stories versus what I have been teaching people for the last 20 years or so about scenarios. Before I start this webinar, I'd like to get an idea or a count about how many of you are currently working on Agile projects. Please, if you are currently working on an Agile project, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Okay, keep going. Got few only. Excuse me. Anyone else working on an Agile project? So I'm assuming the rest of us who did not raise their hands do not know much about user stories or Agile in general. Okay, I have only no more than 10 people here. Kind of surprised, unless people are not hearing my question, because we know many projects are using Agile methodologies. All right, but keep in mind this is going to be useful to you whether you are working on Agile or not. Okay. So acceptance criteria is always connected with user stories. So if your Agile project is using user stories as a way to describe requirements, as opposed to writing requirements, or in addition to requirements. So some Agile projects you just use user stories. Some Agile projects use only requirements, and some Agile projects use both requirements and user stories. And they consider requirements to be a much higher level statement of need, and they take a larger requirement and they break it down into a number of user stories. Now, those projects that use user stories may or may not use acceptance criteria, and we're going to get into the details. I'm just trying to give you the sort of the scope of the presentation and the context. So those projects that use user stories may or may not use acceptance criteria. Also, it is fair to say that user stories are part of the Scrum methodology within Agile, which means if your project is Agile and is not using Scrum, they may not be using user stories. However, we also know that some agile projects that use other methodologies such as extreme programming or Kanban or something similar, but they still do user stories. So really, there is no rule in Agile. It's hard to say that, right? There is no rule. You do whatever you want. You want to use requirements, not user stories, fine. You want to use user stories, but not requirements, fine. You want to use both of them, fine. You want to use user stories as part of a Scrum, fine. You're not Scrum, but you want to use user stories, fine. You want to use user stories without acceptance criteria, fine. All right, so with that being said, I just want to give a definition of what is a user story. For those of you who did not raise their hand, that they are working on Agile projects. So a user story, as we can see, it's a simple statement describing what a user of the system can or will do when using the system. So the key component here is the user. There has to be something that the user is going to be doing, all right? Now, you can imagine from the name of the user story, people say it relates to the user. It is relevant to the user. It has to be something that the user is interested in, which means if something the user is not interested in, we're not gonna be talking about it. Now, of course, the word story is a really not accurate at all, because if you see a user story, it really has nothing to do with a story. I mean, I'm prepared when someone tells me I'm going to give you a user story, I will hear a story, a long story. But in fact, user story is very far from being long. It's actually short. It's actually the shortest statement you can make about a user need. Yet, people decided to call them user stories. I mean, I don't know what other name would have been. They would have called it like user statement, user need. But I think the word story seems to be attractive, so people use the term. So although it is called a story, it is not really a story. In the beginning, when we started to hear about user stories, I used to joke about it. When I see a user story and I see how very, very brief it is, I said, where is the story? That is not story. That's just the name of the story, okay? So we'll see some examples now. And when you write user stories, it focuses on who is using the system, who is the user, and what they're going to do. And certainly, like any other statement of requirement, it should not address how they are going to be doing it. So it's a very high level, okay? So, but again, when we define what a requirement is, it's the same thing. A requirement should state what a person or what the system should do and not how the system will do it. The only difference here is that user story also focus on who is doing what it is. All right, so the format of the user story as suggested by those who invented the user stories, okay, is like this. As an actor, where an actor is a person or a group of people who are going to be using the system, here's an action I want to do, so that, and here is something people sometimes call it achievement, or purpose, or a goal, or objective, or the reason for which I am doing this. So, as an example, as a customer, I want to be able to check the status of my order online. In fact, I can stop here. And normally when I write user stories, I stop right there. As a customer, I want to be able to check the status of my order online. Now, people say, no. You got to write the reason or the achievement or why you're doing this. So I'm going to add this, in my opinion, meaningless reason. I says, so that I know when I will receive it. But really, you have to ask yourself, in my opinion, I'm talking, giving you my opinion. Does this add anything to the user story? Does it add anything to the developer, or it gives any more details to the developer to write the design and the code for that user story? Or does it give any information or any more details to the tester to write the test cases for that user story? In my opinion, no. Of course, there's a lot of argument, and I'm not going to open the argument here. Some of you might have a different opinion, you know, but here's the thing. The literature and those people who suggested or who invented user story said, well, this is a very important. In fact, when I argued with some people, say, you know, I don't normally care to mention why I'm doing it. This is no, if you cannot think of a reason for which the user is doing this user story, then most likely that user story is not important and you may have to remove it from the system. Well, that's not true. I don't know how this additional thing we add, it gives us a reason why, and it tells us this user story is important. And if it was not there, if I were to give you my user story as without this, as a customer, I want to be able to check the stats of my order online. I don't know if anyone would say, do we really need this? And the only way they can tell if they need it is to see something that says so that I can know when I will receive it. All right, so that's my position about user stories. Sometimes people try to jam more information into the cause or the reason. And I say, if you start seeing more information here, most likely you're talking about another user story. So your user story, so for example, if I were to modify this to say, as a customer, I want to be able to check the status of my order so that I can change the address where it should be sent. And people do that, by the way. They say, the reason I want to check the status is to see if it has been shipped or not, and if it has not been shipped, I can go and change the address where it should be sent. So they write that. They say, as a customer, I want to be able to check the status of my order online so that I can change the address where it should be sent. Well, that's wrong then, because the ability to change the address is a different user story. In fact, it'll be a sub-user story of that one we're looking at. And you will write that user story separately to say, as a customer, I want to be able to change the address to receive my order. Right? Got that? Again, one more time. Don't let this bother you. If you so much believe in the reason or the objective or the achievement, whatever people call it, and you consistently do it, go ahead and do it. No big deal. I'm telling you, if you find yourself being sort of ridiculous in trying to make up a reason, you don't have to. All right, please feel free to ask questions anytime by writing your question to the questions tab there. Okay, so now user stories can be very large. For example, here, as a passenger, I want to be able to check into my flight online and to get my boarding pass. Well, some people say this is the last piece here, and to get my boarding pass is actually the reason for which I'm going to check into the flight. And I say, if this is the only reason, okay, go ahead and put it there. If there are other reasons for which a user would like to check into the flight, then guess what? So, because remember, you check into your flight online. So if there are other reasons, don't put this one here, because this makes it sound like my only reason to check into my flight is to get my boarding pass. Okay, and put something else, like, for example, as a passenger, I want to be able to check into my flight online so that I don't have to do it at the airport. Good enough? And this does not add any more information to the developer or the tester. And then getting my boarding pass would be one of the other user stories under this very large user story. When a user story is large like this, we call it an epic, okay? And if the team judges that the team or the product owner in an agile project, if they judge that a user story is very large, then they should decide to break it down into a number of user stories. All right, and here are three different, I'm going to call them sub-user stories. I don't know what else to call them. It says here, as a passenger, I want to be able to select a seat. Obviously, I select my seat while I am doing this larger user story, or when I'm doing the process of checking into my flight, I want to be able to select a seat. And someone else might say, what if I already have a seat selected or assigned to me? I say, do you want to be able to change that seat? And the answer is yes. Then we write also another user story. We don't remove this one. This one will still be relevant to those who do not have seat already assigned. And you would write another one here that says, as a passenger, I want to be able to change my seat assignment. And I don't want to worry about having to write reasons for all that. Okay, what? So as a passenger, I want to be able to select a seat. Imagine if I am forced to write the reason or the achievement. I say what? So that I can sit at that seat or in that seat, or what? So that I have a seat on the flight? No, don't bother. Another user story here. As a passenger, I want to be able to upgrade to first class. Well, the implication here is to upgrade my seat to first class. And obviously, pay the difference. I could put it as part of the user story or not. Someone says, you should really put it because it will add more information. And I would have to agree, but it's not in the achievement. So I want to be able to upgrade to first class and pay the difference. And by the way, if the only way to pay the difference is using a credit card, you could be more specific and say, as a passenger, I want to be able to upgrade my seat to first class and pay the difference using a credit card. But leaving that out would give you the freedom later on when you speak and you talk about the details of the user stories. Then you can decide that people can pay the difference in the fare, either using a credit card or using miles or using cash or using check or whatever. All right. One more user story. I want to be able to receive my boarding pass on my mobile device. Yes, just one user story. Some other people might have a need because they don't have a mobile device or they don't like the boarding pass to come on a mobile device. They say, as a passenger, I want to be able to print my boarding pass. And there should be another one for those who do not have access to the printer that says, as a passenger, I want to be able to fax my boarding pass to a fax machine, and so on. Okay, and as you can see, on all that, I am not bothering with adding the objective or the achievement or whatever, like people say. And I'm okay with that. I'm not worried. I'm not missing any information, and I'm not missing anything to determine whether this user story is important or not. All right. Now, with looking at what you have on the screen here and comparing it to what we have known for a longer time as far as requirements. Because remember, not all of us come to Agile from nowhere. Most of us come to Agile after they practiced. I'm going to say this, and I know I'm going to upset some people. Many of us have come to Agile after they have practiced good software engineering. Good software engineering. And they use the requirement management, so they understand about requirements. They know what it means to take a large requirement and break it down into sub requirements. So you have requirement number 1 that says passengers should be or shall be able to check into their flight online. And then requirement number 1.1 that says passengers shall be able to select a seat. And the requirement number 1.2, you know, now I'm phrasing the same thing in the form of requirements. Okay. If I were to write requirements, okay. And requirement number 1.2 would say something like passengers shall be able to upgrade their seat to first class. And requirement number 1.3 would be passengers will be able to or shall be able to receive boarding pass using a mobile device. The difference is that when I write things as requirements, I can add more details than this. I am not restricted by this dumb format. I'm sorry to say that. For what reason I have to write a user story like this? What is wrong? I mean, because I've had this actually as a requirement for a longer time. And I've dealt with it as a requirement. And this was the highest level requirement. And these and much more were the lower level requirements. And as I said, in addition, I have the ability to add more details because I'm using free text. I say, as a passenger, I want to be able to select a seat if I don't have a seat already assigned. Otherwise, I can always change my seat if I have seat assigned. Or here I can say, as a passenger, I want to be able to upgrade my seats to first class and pay the difference using a credit card. Whatever details you want to add. So requirements are written in what I'm going to call free format, and you can write what you want. I'm not disputing the value of user stories. I'm just clarifying things so that those of you who are dealing with user stories for the first time do not think that this is a breakthrough. This is not a breakthrough. This is just a format that someone decided to use, and the reason they decided to use, they say a number of things that are not really true. They say, this is simple and sweet. Well, since when we want to keep our requirements simple and sweet? They say, this is short. I don't want it to be short. But because people argue that requirements are huge, and we don't know how to deal with a huge requirement. Who said that a requirement has to be huge? When the requirement is huge, we break it down to 1.1, 1.2, 1.2.1, 1.2.1.3. We break it down, and we know we keep the context of the requirement. By the way, this is my passion for requirement management. Why? Because what I have experienced over 25 years working with requirement management, knowing that requirements provide far more details than what a user story will do. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, I know I have a number of questions from some people here, and I will get to them very soon. I don't know if they are questions. Okay, well, Ron says the reason or achievement is useful in setting the priorities for backlog. So, which means it tells you which user story is more important than another, and those ones that are not so important, we're gonna postpone them for a little bit. We're going to keep them in the backlog, and the backlog is one of those things. And thank you, Ron, for sharing your opinion. But again, one more time, forgive me, one more time. Do I need that achievement phrase or clause to tell me if that user story is important or not important, or less important than another? So if I have, for example, let's just say, for example, I have two user stories. One of them say, as a passenger, I want to be able to receive my boarding pass on a mobile device. And another one, as a passenger, I want to be able to receive my boarding pass. I want to be able to print my boarding pass. So if I were to add achievement clause to each one of those, how does this achievement clause would tell me that one of them is more important than another? I appreciate your reaction, Ron, and I know this is what's being said out there in the literature, but that's not accurate. I have a couple of comments slash questions from Jill. Jill says, and I told you, there is different people can argue about this, and I'm not gonna try to use my time here today to argue, because that's a sort of a not very important point in writing user stories. Jill says, I think knowing when it will be received, she's talking about the order, is useful. I mean, I know it is useful, and that's why I want to do the user story. I'm questioning, is it useful to write it in the user story itself? I know as a customer, it's important for me, very important for me to know when I'm going to receive the order. I'm questioning if I should put it in the user story. And as you said, many of us may disagree. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll probably have to have a cup of coffee and sit down for a couple hours to argue this issue together. But again, we'll never reach an agreement like many things else in Agile. All right, so Jill agrees that, I'm sorry, let me read this quick. My experience has been that too often the requirements were not detailed. Oh, requirements are not detailed? Wrong. If someone writes requirements that's not detailed, then they don't know how to write requirements, okay? And forgive me, if requirements are not detailed, Jill, so are we hoping that for user stories to be more details? No. User stories cut down on all the details in a requirement. Funny enough, when I argued this with some gurus, Agile gurus, and I said, I have a requirement here that has tons of details. I have requirement, high-level requirement, and I have sub-requirement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I told him, how do you convert this to user story? He said the user story is a top-level requirement. And I said, how about the rest of the details? Where are these? He said, those are discussions that go on. Well, I like discussions, but I don't like to rely on those discussions to get the details. If I can write the details, then I will write them down, and then we can discuss them later on. I do not want to write a brief user story, and the product owner or the team says, keep it brief, keep it simple and sweet, and we can discuss it to come up with more details. And someone gave me, or actually not someone, a book gave a very ridiculous reason why the user story needs to be brief. He said it must be brief, and you must not write more details in the user story. And the reason is you want to keep that until the time when you discuss the user stories. And if you were to add details up front, that will kind of deceives you, makes you think that the user story is detailed enough and you don't discuss it. Leave it brief, leave it short and sweet, and then you discuss it. And then when I discuss it, when am I going to write all that stuff? All right, I think we should close that argument for now, because we have more important things to cover. But again, Jill, Ron, thank you for your opinion. Certainly, I mean, it counts. It means something to many people, and it's a matter of opinion, right? I'm a thinker. I'm used to this. I'm used to not to take anything that someone else invented for me and use it. I need to analyze it, and I'm sure you do the same as well. All right. Yeah. So my argument here saying user stories could have been written as requirements, and we would not have lost anything. Actually, we would have gained a lot. And of course, I run agile projects. I don't write user stories like that. I find it easier to write requirements that are very detailed, so that I can provide everything I want. And I break my requirements to sub requirements all the time. And if I'm interested in the development team to take a small piece to work on it, they take one small piece of the requirement, but yet I'm still keeping a track of the fact that this large requirement I'm dealing with has 15 sub requirements underneath, and we group them in a way such that everything is independent. I have no objection on the use of the user stories, except the restrictive format that does not allow me to add more details. All right, so done with that. Here is some, I keep, of course, now speaking negative about user stories, but it is true. They're brief and high level. Everyone knows that. Absolutely, everyone knows that. Now, here is something very important. We focus on user stories very much because they are about the user, and they are about something the user wants to do. And the definition of the user story, as I gave it to you, clearly says it focuses on who is doing what. All right, well, great. Does everything really the system do is something that's of interest to a user or involves a user? The system does hundreds and thousands of things that does not involve a user. So if I am forced to write a user story that says, as a whoever, I want to be able to do this. How am I going to write a user story, for example, for something where the system has to calculate state sales taxes on an order? Is there a user who's going to do this? There is no user. The system will take the order. As you place it, it will follow certain rules to calculate the state sales taxes. And how do I write down the calculations or the rules or the exceptions or whatever that has to do with sales taxes? Where do I write this as user story? Absolutely not. I can't. All right. A week ago, I was dealing with a feature where an airline system like Delta Airlines, the system will go at midnight every day and run a process by which they will do what they call a complimentary first class upgrade to those people who are elite members, like diamond and the gold and the silver. Okay, and the system follows a very complex algorithm, if you will, to do that. So it looks at every flight within the next, say, 24 hours or 48 hours and says how many seats were sold in first class, how many seats are left, how many of those seats that are left we can give for free, who are the elite members, how many diamond, how many gold, how many silver, and so on. And is there any one of them having a companion with them or not? And how can we assign those seats free? None of that can be written as a user story. And you must agree. I mean, if you try now to convince yourself that you can actually write user story for that, then you are really artificially tweaking user stories to fit something that they were not made for. I have the requirement for that feature. I can show it to you, which is a very large requirement. I agree with you. But it's broken down to sub requirements. And guess what? When I tried to write that requirement, I found that the algorithm that's used by the system is very complex to the point I cannot even describe it in plain English. So I had to provide a decision table to describe the algorithm that the system will use to make the decision about who gets upgraded for free. All right, I'm going to tell you this as someone who's very experienced in requirement management. User stories do not fit, period. So again, people who are advocating user stories, they're just looking at the smaller picture. They're not looking at the larger system picture. Okay, so that's, I want you, I'm not telling you this to tell you user stories are bad. No, I'm telling you this so that you can keep an eye on these things that are not describable in a user story. So you have to find other ways to write those features. And you have to write, you have to use something like decision table to describe the algorithm that can never be described in user story. Okay, and most importantly, I'm trying to tell you that there is a feature here that I'm describing to you about the complementary first class upgrade that is done by the system and no user will do it. So is this feature going to be done by any user? No, there is no user involved to start with. No one even can try to fool me and tell me that I'm sure there must be an operator who's going to initiate it. No, there is no operator. I told you, at midnight of every night, the system runs this process. So if you really have a solution to this, especially those of you who use user stories, I'm not going to say those of you who advocate user stories, because I'm sure no one will take the courage to advocate it. But those of you who use user stories, tell me, help me. How do I use user stories to describe these things, especially the feature I just described? Now, when I teach people requirements, I focus so much on, I tell people, most of the time we are very busy. We are very busy trying to make this, to make sure the system does what it's supposed to do. And all the requirements are always written in the form of system shall do this, or user shall be able to do this. With the same token, user stories are written the same way. As a user, I want to be able to do this. Okay? And I teach people about negative requirements. Okay? Why? Because negative requirements are critical, because business analysts and requirement writers do not write them. You don't see very often a requirement or a user story, for that matter of fact, that says system shall not do the following. A user shall not be able to do this. Okay, I refer to those shall not do requirements or shall not do behavior. I refer to them also as negative requirements. And guess what? Those are the things that cause failure in most of the systems. Why? Because developers and testers are so busy trying to make sure the system meets the requirements. The system does everything that is stated in the requirements. And of course, the user stories. And how about the things that are not stated? And some people argue and says, well, if they're not stated in the requirements, then the system should not worry about them. Really? So when I write you a requirement about people canceling an order and receiving a refund, and I don't write in that requirement, and of course I write all the details about the rules of cancellations, the refund, the partial refunds, the fully refundable tickets or the fully refundable orders versus partially refundable orders, all that stuff. But I don't put in my requirement something that refers to the fact that the system shall not allow users or customers to cancel order more than once. If I don't write that down, you don't want the developer to worry about it, and you don't want the tester to worry about it. This is what we refer to as negative behavior or negative requirements that will lead to negative testing. And in my courses where I teach about testing and requirements and so on, I ask people to focus so much on those shall not do things because they're not in the requirements. And because they're not in the requirements, they always fall through the cracks. And we put out systems that truly does everything it's supposed to do, but it does many other things that it's not supposed to do. And that happens because people did not pay attention to the shall not do's. So I am saying user stories are not good for shall not do's. If we had a minimal chance with requirements to include shall not do requirements, we don't have any chance to include shall not do user stories. I don't know how you can write this. You're going to say, as a customer, I shall not be able to cancel the order twice. Maybe, but many other examples were not fit. Now, keep in mind also, when we speak about requirements in general, there are all these requirements that have to do with the functionality of the system, and people refer to them as functional requirements. There are so many other requirements that some people, for the lack of the better name, they call them non-functional requirements. And I've seen at least one book calling them the other requirements. Okay, I'm going to call them quality requirements. And the quality requirements have to do with the goodness of the system. And as you know very well, examples of those quality requirements are all the things that have to do with reliability and performance and usability and survivability and load, all that stuff. Heck, where does this fit in user stories? So all what I'm trying to say here, be aware that user stories only focus on functionality. Only focus on functionality. And if you really want to address quality needs, quality objective of the system, then you have to go and write requirements to do that. At least this is what I do. Okay, so this is just an idea. Okay, trust me, I tried to look for a word other than drawbacks. Okay, because drawbacks always has a negative connotation. And I tried not to be negative about user stories, but at the same time, I wanted to caution people about certain things they have to pay attention to when they use user stories. Okay, so my English did not help me to find a word that says, here are things you have to worry about, sort of. So I didn't find a noun for that. All right, let's see some questions again. A quick question, someone's asking, is this presentation being recorded? Yes, it will. It is recorded and it will be available on the IIC website. Thank you, Ron, for your comment. Jill says limitations of user stories instead of drawbacks. Jill, thank you for trying to help me, really. But in fact, I tried to use the word limitations before, and I thought in my own way of thinking that limitations is much more negative than drawbacks. Maybe you're right. Maybe limitations. Maybe, and actually Ron is suggesting the same thing. Okay, in fact, I had it before as limitations. Yeah, you're right. Drawbacks means disadvantage or something, but you're right, they are sort of limitations, but I hope you do agree with these limitations that I have mentioned. Thank you for the recommendation about the use of the term. Thank you. All right, so now when people realize that user stories are not brief enough, they said, okay, let's add some details, and they add the details through discussions. As I said earlier, when I showed the user story to one of the Agile gurus, and we were attending a conference on Agile that time, and I said, Joe, tell me, I'm having a harder time dealing with that user story because it's brief, it's not telling me much. When I write requirements, I have so much details I can write. In user stories, I cannot write details. And he said, that's the point. You're not supposed to write details. You're supposed to leave it brief so that you can have the opportunity to discuss it. Really, When I have more details, for some reason, for some obscure reason, I lose the chance to discuss it. In fact, it's on the contrary. When I have more details, it derives me to have more discussions about those details. When I don't have any details, I don't know what to discuss. I can sit down in front of a user story and I don't even know what to ask. So honestly, in my requirement courses for agile and non-agile projects, I work with requirements and I give people requirements with some level of details and ask them to simulate a requirement review meeting, and they ask questions. And I see the number of questions are coming from people. And then I give them a user story and I ask people again to simulate a meeting where we discuss the user stories. Guess what? People sit in the front of the user story and they don't know what questions to ask. Why? Because there is nothing to stimulate their thinking. Yet, some agile projects suggested that we take the user story, we run it, we have a discussion. And I'm having a problem with this box here called discussion because I don't know who's involved. Of course, ideally, and if life is good, everyone involved in the team, it's the agile team, the product owner, the testers, the developers, everyone else can participate. But people, as you probably know, people can participate but not actually participate. People can be sitting there but not knowing what to ask and not having questions to ask. And I'm having even a major problem at the time we discuss the user stories. Do we really know that we're going to be able to ask all questions that needed to be asked about the user story? I doubt it. So that's why I have a way to implement that discussion as an ongoing online collaborative discussion. So I don't have a meeting where we discuss the user story, but rather I have an ongoing online collaborative discussions. Okay, and then they come up with acceptance criteria. Okay, so and here's why people believe that acceptance criteria is important. Establish the boundaries of the user story. You can use it to derive tests and to confirm that the developer actually implemented the user story the way it's supposed to be implemented. And of course, it helps people talk, it helps the team talk about the user stories. Okay, and also they can be edited or removed or augmented. You can add more acceptance criteria and so on. So acceptance criteria was in fact the best addition that happened to user stories. And I'm going to strongly recommend, if your team is going to use user stories, absolutely, at the minimum, you must use acceptance criteria. Okay? So, and here's some examples. If I take that user story as a passenger, I want to be able to upgrade my seat to first class. I could very well add those acceptance criteria, which I will use at a later time to determine that the user story have been completed. Pays upgrade using a credit card, the upgrade any time during the check-in process. The passenger may upgrade some or all the passengers on the same reservation, and you can add more. And certainly those acceptance criteria come as a result of the discussion amongst the team members, okay? Very important, absolutely. This is the best thing that happened to Agile and happened to user stories. And user stories without acceptance criteria are nothing. I'm sorry. Keep going here. Now, in my own experience, I found myself wanting to add more details, more and more details than what is in the acceptance criteria. So I always have been teaching people about scenarios. And I'm not gonna tell you that don't use acceptance criteria, but use scenarios. No, I cannot do this because I don't know how good you are in writing your acceptance criteria, and I don't know how bad you are in writing your acceptance criteria. I know one thing, that scenarios will always provide far more details about a user story than acceptance criteria. That's what I established over the years, working with Agile projects, having people who are working on Agile projects attending my training, and no one ever said something like, oh, no, acceptance criteria provides more details than scenarios. In fact, everyone said, either said, We're going to replace our acceptance criteria with scenarios, or we're going to continue our acceptance criteria as a higher level, but then we're going to use scenarios as another level of details. So what is a scenario? It's a phrase, it's a simple phrase describing anything. It's not something that you're going to use to test or to verify that the user story have been implemented, but rather it's describing any condition, any situation, any event, anything at all that could happen in production. So that makes it general enough that you can list a lot of things. Okay. And it has to do with anything, whether it involves the user or not. Remember, because the user stories are about a user, then acceptance criteria are always about what the user does. Scenarios are not. Scenarios are far more general than that. And as I said, I have methodology that I developed over the years. I taught people over the years about how to build the systems and how to test the systems using scenarios. It's called scenario-based development and testing. All conditions, all situations, whether they are expected or not, normal or abnormal, initiated by the user or not, initiated by the system, or even an event that's outside the control of any user and outside the control of any system. Any one of those should be listed as a scenario. Much more exhaustive, I can tell you that. So if you look at this user story, as a passenger, I want to be able to upgrade my seat to first class. Same user story. My scenarios would look like that. Now look at the level of details. Now I have scenario because I'm trying to write scenarios to describe situations or conditions. I have one scenario that says I got one passenger on the reservation wants to upgrade his or her his seat to first class, while there is actually a first class seat available. Now you can imagine this scenario is different when one passenger on the reservation would like to upgrade to first class when no seat is available in first class. This is a positive scenario. This is a negative scenario. I'm trying to upgrade to first class, but there is no seats available. Okay? Now the third scenario says what? One passenger wants to upgrade to first class, but they have a seat on coach. But the user story did not say, what if I don't have a seat on coach? Can I get a first class seat? One passenger on the reservation, this is the next one, upgrading to first class while he did not have a coach seat assigned. All this about one passenger on the reservation upgrading to first class and paying with an invalid credit card. Okay, that's a negative scenario. One passenger is upgrading to first class, and another passenger competes on the same seat. So you're trying to get that first class, the first class seat that is available, and some other passenger at the same time. That's what we call concurrency control, right? Okay. Now, is this going to happen? Of course it will happen. We know it will happen. Now, I wonder how you will write this in acceptance criteria. One passenger tries to upgrade after the check-in is complete. Of course. Can this happen? Of course. I check into the process, I get my boarding pass, but then I go back and try to upgrade my seat to first class. Has the user story said that? No. Do I expect acceptance criteria to say that? Normally not. People don't go to that level of details. I got 2 slides of like how many scenarios? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 scenarios so far, and that's only have to do with one passenger. Now, the next slide has about three scenarios that are all involving multiple passengers on the same reservation. All of them are upgrading to first class. Certainly, I hope you agree that this scenario is different from the scenario where one person only is upgrading. And another one where multiple passengers are there, but some of them are upgrading to first class and some are not. Yeah, like 2 passengers, but wants to upgrade. One person wants to upgrade to first class and pay the difference, and the other person is not upgrading. Remember, they are on the same reservation. That's different. We're not talking about 2 different reservations here. And the third one is multiple passengers on the reservation, all of them upgraded to first class, but there is no seats assigned, and they have no seats assigned. And you can go on, and you say, you know, 2 passengers want to upgrade to first class, but there is only 1 seat available. Okay, and 2 people upgrading to first class, and there are 2 seats available, and so on. So the point I am going to make now is that scenarios allow you to be far more exhaustive, far more details, exploring far more situations than can normally be done with an acceptance criteria. Okay. Now, am I saying that you cannot do acceptance criteria like that? If you can write your acceptance criteria with the same level of details and the same level of exhaustiveness, if you will, like what I am providing you here, I'm okay with acceptance criteria. I'm just telling you that people who write acceptance criteria, they don't get into that level of details, because they make it simple and sweet, and want to verify this, verify this, verify this. The writing things in the form of a situation or a scenario like this allows you to get into more details. That's my experience. When I teach scenarios to people, that's what they discover. Now, important, very important now, when we talk about scenarios, we always talk about negative scenarios versus positive scenarios. and I always suggest that, I always encourage people to have at least 50-50. So negative scenarios are any scenario that you're trying to use invalid data, like invalid credit card or whatever. Any scenario that exposes some abnormal or extreme or uncommon condition. Most importantly, anything like the person gets disconnected from the internet, system crashes, another system goes down, the communication line breaks, whatever it is, anything that happens that normally does not happen. Okay, that when you do this, you're actually building systems for reliability. You're building reliable systems. Now then any situation that exercises or exposes a shall not do situation. Anytime you're trying to get the system to do something it is not supposed to do, and this is going back to the idea of my negative requirements, you need to do this. So in my opinion, this is the power, the real power of scenarios that I don't see people doing with acceptance criteria. Now, why am I telling you this? Am I telling you to abandon acceptance criteria and start using scenarios? No. I'm telling you that when you use your acceptance criteria, watch for these things. Make sure your acceptance criteria has this stuff, because if it doesn't, then I don't know what you're building. You're building plain vanilla systems that do not address uncommon things and severe things and shall not do things. Of course, positive scenarios are all the other scenarios that are normal course of action. When we get a lot of scenarios, we do risk-based testing. So I'm gonna have to do this quick. So now, when you use my method of scenarios, you come up with much more scenarios than what you can ever test. And that's why I suggest that you go through this risk-based analysis to decide which scenarios are more important than another, and you establish testing priority and so on. I don't have time for this, my apology. Okay, so much more concrete, allow focusing on positive and negative scenarios, and allow for risk-based testing. Now, here's my recommendation slide to you. Do whatever you want. You can take user story and just do acceptance criteria, as I said. But if you do, then make sure that you cover everything that I talked about in scenarios. You can do user stories, acceptance criteria, then get the scenarios to provide more details. Or you can do without acceptance criteria if you think they're a waste of time, because you're going to get into the details anyway here. Do user stories, then, and just to do scenarios and forget about acceptance criteria. Okay, do whatever your team is comfortable with. Now, as part of this webinar, I wanted to show you how Romana ALM does scenarios and acceptance criteria at the same time. Okay, so I know you didn't have time, but if I work very quick here to show you one screen in Romana. So this is Romana ALM, which is a complete application life cycle management that allows you to do requirements and testing and everything else. I'm going to log very quick here. I'm going to log in as a project manager, and I'm going to just look at one screen. I'm going to show you one screen only. So if I'm going to open that project here. All right, that project has, okay. So if I were to click on user stories here on the top, and Romana ALM is available, and it does agile and non-agile projects. So if I look at any user story here, so let's look at this one. So I have the same thing here. I have an epic here. As a passenger, I want to be able to check into my flight, and I have two sub requirements right here, sub user stories down here. And so here is the user story about the upgrade. I can put my acceptance criteria here. All right. And after I add all my acceptance criteria, I can also add scenarios right here. Okay. Adding acceptance criteria is just straightforward. Okay. So here, so I can write another one, acceptance criteria 3, for example, like that. I'm just, and click enter. It's added there. Acceptance criteria 4, added. So down there, and so on. Okay. Now, if I feel that those acceptance criteria are not detailed enough, I click here and add more. I add scenarios. I create a scenario here, and the scenario I can just add the name of the scenario. I can add scenario number 1 here. Okay. I can add a description. It's optional. I can add expected behavior of a scenario, something that you don't normally put in acceptance criteria. I can, and it tells me that this scenario is part of this user story number 3, which is whatever it is. Now, I can also do the frequency of occurrence. I can do the impact of failure. I can do the probability of failure to help me do the risk analysis, and I save. And that's my first scenario. I don't have to provide all this information, just in case any one of you thinking that this is a lengthy process. No, you can just add the scenario name and click add, click save. Add scenario name, click save, and so on. So that is how. So now I'm going to go back to, you see this breadcrumbs at the top here. This is scenarios. I'm going to go back to the user story right here. If I click on that one, as just an easy navigation. Now I have my acceptance criteria down here. I have my scenarios. Now I can see 3 dots appearing here on the scenarios, telling me that there are more details here. If I were to click here, I can go and get a list of all the scenarios. Sorry to take 3 minutes beyond my time. Let me go quick here to see if anyone has a question. Very quick. Thank you, Ron. Ron says, excellent. Sounds like you have all your test cases defined before you even start development. Absolutely, Ron. This is the whole deal. This is why I believe scenarios are powerful, because I suggest that people do this at the time they are reviewing the user story. And not only that, they finish their test cases, but they're also supposed to give those scenarios to developers so that they can build the code and the design based on those scenarios. That's the purpose. If any one of you is interested in learning more about scenarios and how you can use them, I have a bunch of other free webinars available on scenarios and scenario. They are recorded on the IIST.org website. I also teach them live all the time. Thank you so much all for being with me in this webinar. Hopefully to see you in other webinars. Please give me your feedback when you get the evaluations of this webinar. I will now turn the presentation to Eric. Eric?
Thank you, Dr. Hanna, for your time today, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar sponsored by Romana Software, the leaders in application lifecycle management technology. For more information on how Romana ALM can help you or your organization, please visit romanasoftware.com. You can follow Romana Software on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube to find out more information about Romana news, events, and promotions. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great day. Thank you, Dr. Hanna.
Thank you, Eric.